Hello again, and it's great to see you, and thanks for watching the podcast. This week, we're going to focus on equipment. Now, focusing on equipment can be a little bit boring, but do you know what? Knowing how to use the tools in the sensory space is really, really important, and this is often where it falls down. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
As we've said before, sensory rooms have been around for a long time now. And if you have a look at the standard sort of setup in a sensory room, nothing seems to have changed much at all. We've still got projectors, we've still got bubble tubes, we've still got fiber optics. But actual fact, there have been a lot of changes, and we're going to look at how things have moved on. If you take projectors, way back, and you'll still find them in most sensory rooms, we used to use rotary projectors. These included wheels and could project anywhere. Now there's many more options for us to project light sources. So now we've got a much wider range of materials. You don't just have to look at the stuff that's being provided by sensory companies. There's loads of other ways, but there is a little factor we must take into account. Sensory companies have invested a lot of time and money into making products that are as safe as they can be. If you're going to step outside of that structure, that support that the sensory companies are going to provide you, you've got to give a lot of thought to ensuring the safety of the equipment that you're buying, that it's appropriate for what you're doing, and it's appropriate for how you're using it. We do talk about this equipment, and it's really useful for parents and people outside the education sector to provide them with much more cost-effective approaches for sensory work.
I think it's a really good point that some of the sensory companies do turn out some really good quality stuff. Some of them don't. But there is one thing that, especially in the UK, that you need to be aware of, and that is the difference between toys and novelties. Toys are designed for children. They are designed to be handled. They're designed often to be thrown. They're designed to put in the mouth. And legally, they're very different to something like this. The lovely Ion Party Ball, which we'll no doubt talk about later on. Got this from Amazon, around £10. Pretty good gadget. Show you what it does later. This is a novelty. Legally, a very different thing. This is not designed for working with children. This is purely designed as an effect. So we must be careful when we're working with cheap things like this from Amazon to make sure that our learners, whatever age, are safe when we are working with cheap stuff. For years, one of the most popular pieces of equipment in sensory rooms is projectors. Now, a projector is absolutely brilliant for visual stimulation, to get a whole class engaged in whatever you're showing. And that is a big thing that's changed in sensory rooms. You know, so many times we would have projectors which, well, basically they were like this. Look, I've got my liquid wheel projector just there. Look at that. Absolutely fantastic. And I've got to say, this is still one of my favorite effects of all time. Liquid wheels are absolutely fantastic, but it does take quite a large, expensive piece of equipment to actually do that with. This is an Optikinetics sensory LED projector. Some of you might have old versions of these. And I've got to be honest, this projector, well, a lot of sensory companies still sell them. And you know what? They are still a fantastic piece of equipment. They still work so well. And I think that we shouldn't discount those from rooms. And you know what? Back in the day, let me show you this. You see, you can see the liquid wheel is right there. And the liquid wheel, as I say, is absolutely brilliant. What we used to do with projectors was take wheels apart and we'd actually make our own. And you know what? It was so easy to do. And this is what other projectors lack. You know, just being able to take a load of sweet wrappers or candy wrappers right there, put those into a wheel, to be able to just get a bit of, we used to call this stuff acetate. And all we would ever do to make a wheel like this is just get the rubber ring on the outside, take it off there, and then you have two acrylic discs. whatever you put in between the acrylic discs, you'll be able to project that up onto the wall. So we used to actually print our own effect wheels. This is the story of the rainbow fish. Bubble wrap. Looks absolutely fantastic. Nowadays, there's lots of alternatives with projection. So here I've got a little projector. There it is. That's the projector, the Nebula. And what I can do with this is I can just run videos from YouTube. As what I'm doing now, I've got a little memory stick in the back there with videos that I've actually downloaded. This is brilliant because at the end of the day, what you can do with this is project just about anything you want. You know, it doesn't have to be a particular wheel or something you've made. That's pretty incredible. And you can just put so much content onto a stick and then just run it. So you can just have an aquarium running on your wall should you want to, something like that, which will be absolutely fabulous. So those kind of projectors really, really work well. But actually, there's also a lot cheaper versions. It's a space projector. This projector has wheels, right? And they're a little bit like the wheels that you put in a Optikinetics projector. So I've got my little projector there, bit of paper here, and if I just do that, look at that. Now you see, the catch with this is £7, and it's got wonderful imagery. If your specialist subject is space, this will do. And for a tenner, that is not bad at all, you know. So little projectors like this, they are nowhere near as bright as your big ones, but you know what? You can do a lot of stuff with these.
It's always easy when we're talking about equipment to get lost in just, the fun of playing with the equipment. But you've always got to have in the back of your mind, why did you buy that equipment? What have you got it for? I think I just need to run through some of the reasons why we're using projectors. What's the purpose of projectors in a sensory environment or in the educational environment that you're working with? And one of the ways that we can help stimulate our pupils and actually calm them is with moving images, moving color images, having the right sort of color, calming colors, nothing too jarring, nothing too strong, and moving at a slow pace. Now, the reason movement is important is because it's a well-known fact that our brains are developed to focus upon movement. Movement stimulates a part of the brain and allows us to focus. So it wakes us up. You know that situation when you visit a friend and they don't turn the television off, you can hardly keep your eyes from flicking to the movement on the television. This stimulates our students in the same way. Once we've got that attention, that focus, we're trying to get the children to really focus on something. And the great thing about the rotary projectors is that they have a very, very predictable state of rotation. They're moving steadily from right to left, although they can be reversed. And there's this anticipation with rotary projectors. If it's not a bubble tube, if it's one with actual fixed images on, that fixed image is going to come round and round and round. So we can develop anticipation in our students. We can tell them that the green circle is going to be coming around any minute now. Get ready to watch that green circle. And when it comes, we can develop that response to it. But one of the things that I think you possibly missed out on, allowing students with greater ability to make their own wheels, to use it as part of an art lesson, as part of a media lesson. And they'll love to see their own wheels that they've made projected onto the walls of their classroom or the school hall or anywhere, 15, 20 feet across. It's a wonderful effect. Some of the schools have gone down the road of immersive environments, which use several projectors to create a jungle scene, an under the water scene. And that's quite an expensive option to go for. But with a simple projector and some of the approaches that we've talked about before, using tents, umbrellas for projection, we can create our own small immersive environment that allows us to develop story time and to develop imagination. So there's lots of reasons to be using projectors. Your imagination is simply a limit to them.
A wheel like this This is one that you can see there. That's just a lot of scribbles on a piece of acetate. And if I just pop that onto there, you stick it up there, you've done that. You know, it's a brilliant way to do art. And that's something which, to be honest, in this day and age, what we might do is look at doing that with an iPad. So you could actually project an iPad up and you can draw on the iPad and see your pictures on the walls. There's a lot of comparisons there that can work really, really well. But the great thing about projection is that you're not directly in contact with a piece of equipment. Very often you are simply projecting light onto a surface. And to be honest, you don't get much safer than that. If you're going to project onto a wall, then that is really, really safe. The only thing you've got to watch out for with a lot of projectors is a lot of our learners, especially with a visual impairment, may want to look straight down the lens because they get a lot of light and a lot of visual stim from that. And that can be an issue. So projection, there's lots and lots of gadgets you can use, but wheel projectors, still really good. Data projectors, PowerPoint projectors, cinema projectors, you know, those kind of things. We see them all over Amazon. They're fantastic. But don't forget, little things like the Ion Party Ball, this also falls into the realm of little projectors, and they work really well because you can put them anywhere. And something I always go on about is one thing we call back projection. And back projection is basically about putting the light not onto a surface like that, but actually projecting through an opaque surface like that. If you do this, that means that the learner is looking straight at the brightest point of light. They're not looking down that, which may be quite uncomfortable on the eye. If you put, in this case, a A4 or a letter-sized piece of paper in front of your projector, then you can project straight onto it. And you can see there with an Ion Party Ball, you get a really great effect. But also, has to be said, that with a nebula projector, once it decides to focus, you'll get a great effect from this. You might not see it that well because I am a little bit far away. And if I had another hand, which I haven't got, there we go, I can do that. Look at that. I can basically project my fish right in front of the learner, which is just fabulous. So this means we can get the light right to the learner when we're using projection. It's so simple. So just for a moment, I've switched my glorious multisensory room off because I want to talk for 2 minutes about fiber optics. Back in the 1990s, we decided that putting fiber optics in sensory rooms would be a great idea. So we used these. These are called side glow fiber optics. And I've got to be honest, the reason why I did this was because I found that the learners we were working with would always want to get hold of the light. So no heat, no electricity down these things. Absolutely wonderful. But of course, you get a lovely, lovely fiber optic like this, and it's going to cost you. That's going to be around £500 upwards, but it is beautiful. However, these days on Amazon, you can get these. These are called fiber optic whips. Now, I've got to be honest, some of the imagery that you'll see on Amazon with fiber optic whips is a bit dodgy. But you know what? At around £35, these are really, really nice. Now, again, remember, these are a novelty. They're not a toy. If a little bit of that goes down the throat, that isn't going to be good news. So if you're working with somebody who's going to mouth it, be really careful with thin fiber optics like this. The big fiber optics, these are really hard. These are great. Put those in the mouth, it's going to be a lot safer. So fiber optics, £500 upwards, £40. Oof, that's where technology has kind of moved on quite a bit. And for home sensory rooms, for sensory rooms that are on a lower budget, you can get lots of things like this. Another piece of equipment that's really stood the test of time is bubble tubes. Look at that. They're amazing effect. Even though that's just a picture, they still look absolutely stunning. Now, a bubble tube, I first saw these in Holland at the Hartenberg. Whoa, way back in 1980 something, when they developed the first Snoezelen room. So I was on the person responsible for putting bubble tubes in. Ad Verhul was. And you know what? They are a fantastically stimulating piece of equipment. And many people have questioned over the years, well, why do bubble tubes work? What do bubble tubes actually do? And you know what? You have to really think about this one because bubble tubes do a lot. We've written loads about bubble tubes, haven't we, Clive?
Yes, I mean, I do remember when we used to do courses way back in time of you saying, Clive, now he'll tell you 50 uses for a bubble tube. And you know, I actually could. Bubble tubes, I mean, I've yet to see a sensory room or a school that doesn't have a bubble tube. The other question is why? Why a bubble tube so universally loved? Let's unpick it. First of all, you've got this large object with color. It is prominent in whatever room it is. It's there. It's right in your face. It's got movement. It's actually the air bubbling into the tube causes air bubbles to float to the top of the tube. It creates that illusion of movement. And we know that our brains are designed to pick out movement, to focus on movement, to be attracted to movement. They also generally have colors in them that are calming. They're soft pastel colors, so that they create a warm, a calming environment. They're a very pleasing light source in any room. So much so that, I mean, they've become almost universal, haven't they? I mean, there was a period when you could buy them anywhere to put in your bedroom. So they provide that lovely, pleasing environment. You've got that color change. So you've got a predictable color change going on. And in the older tubes used to get their light source from a single halogen bulb underneath a rotating wheel. So the colors were totally predictable. We could tell when pink was going to be followed by blue, by green, by yellow, which was a very, very important element in using them for work. They've got a vibration within them that so many of our children love. And so many children that I see want to crawl behind the bubble tube, hug it, get hold of it, get really close to it. They're just such an attraction for our students that they then become something we can really use and work with.
I think one of the massive things about bubble tubes, especially in the world of somebody who has autism or is autistic, is that bubble tubes tend not to move. They tend to be one of those communicative objects of reference that stays put, stays right where it is. It's a solid thing that just is there. Every time you go into that room, that tube is going to be there. And that is a great communicator for some of our learners when they're going into multi-sensory rooms. And, you know, when you've got a bubble tube that is controllable, they are wonderful for stories.
We can select the lights at will. And there are many other bubble tubes that are around now that have a switching unit built into the system, so we can plug switches in. This gives us a whole load of opportunities to include students with it. One of my favorite activities is just using it for language development. The bubble tube itself is the reward, is the reinforcement. The bubble tube is the bit that the kids like. So I'm saying to the kids in the group, find me something around that's red. And the first one back who's got something that's red gets to touch the red switch and switch the bubble tube to red. Find me something that's blue. Find me something that's yellow. Make it a bit more complex, blue and yellow, and touching both switches.
So a bubble tube is one of those truly multi-sensory pieces of equipment.
And if anybody's been heard any of my talks on dealing with difficult behavior, they'll have heard me talk about a hormone in the body called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is a really feel-good hormone, and it comes from the pressure involved in contact. It's why babies like to hug blankets, why we like to be hugged, and it's why so many of our students will actually get hold of the bubble tube and just hug it, hold tight. You'll see so many occasions where your children just crawl right round the back of the bubble tube, tuck themselves in and hold on to it. So it's really good for helping some of our students who can be a bit anxious to calm right down. The bubble tube is one of the few pieces of kit that I'm really happy just to let children sit with, and I want to watch how they interact with the bubble tube. It's particularly useful when I'm working with children who I know have anxiety issues, who I know can very quickly go from calm to anxious to maybe acting out to causing problems. And it's not just empty time, though. Take the time, if you're letting your student spend time with the bubble tube, watch them. Examine closely, how are they interacting with that bubble tube? What are they doing? What are their responses? You might get such a wealth of information that you can really build that bubble tube into a program for them to help them deal with issues. Just allow them some time for just to be with it and watch and record their responses to it.
Now, in this podcast, we haven't talked about control systems. We haven't talked about computer systems like the Sensory Guru projection system and those. We'll cover those in another podcast because that is a whole different kettle of fish. I think a sensory room needs to be kept simple. Keep your technology as much as possible to a minimum so that when you go in your room, you're not battling with your equipment, trying to work out how that infinity tunnel works or how do you make the bubble tube change color. You need to be concentrating on the learners, not the equipment.
So to finish off this podcast about sensory equipment, I just want to reinforce some of the points that Richard and I firmly believe in. First thing is, don't overwhelm your students with equipment. Keep it simple. Just keep focused on one or two pieces of a kit, because that allows you to do the second point is to really get to know the equipment, know how it works, know what you can do with it, and then you'll be able to respond with the students appropriately. You can come up with great ideas and you can just catch those moments with those students. So that's it. Don't overwhelm the students with lots of sensory input. Aim for simple and stuff that you really can handle, and you know, above all else, that the kids love it.